Now I want to explain the last column over here. This last column is what is created by our disease. As we have these primary symptoms, self-esteem issues, boundary issues, etc., what happens is that we create other problems out in our environment. These are actually what is happening internally to us. And over here, most of the time is the distress we create out there in our environment. But our primary symptoms here in this column create the secondary symptoms over here. Now, this is an important issue. And it's important for this reason. Most people try to focus on their secondary symptoms, and because these are easier to see because other people are complaining about them to us. And they're easier to see. But in recovery, those are not the ones you want to focus on initially, because it's in treating the primary symptoms that you take care of the secondary symptoms. And when I'm working with someone, I only use the secondary symptoms to point out the primary symptoms, because they're connected. Now let me explain the secondary symptoms so you can understand what I mean. The first one I call negative control issues. Negative control happens two ways in this disease. As a codependent, I am in a state of negative control whenever I'm busy telling you who you should be. Or in other words, whenever I am telling you what your reality is supposed to be. And I divide reality up into 4 parts. And it creates who I am, or gives me my sense of self. The biggest part of it is my body. And as I am aware of it, stay knowing of it, I have a sense of self. The second part of my reality is my thinking processes. And literally that's how I give meaning to incoming data. And believe me, I do that in a real special way, and I probably do it very different from you. Because one of the things about how we think is that it is more about our history and what's happened to us than any current day happening. Most people don't understand that. And most people think everybody else is thinking the way they are. And most people furthermore think that everybody ought to be thinking the way they are or have their same values, which is just ridiculous. But anyway, my thinking is the second part of my reality. It's how I give meaning to incoming data. And I want to tell you, in terms of therapy and recovery, it's in impacting somebody's thinking that we make the most changes. Most recovery is about reordering thinking. That's why I do an incredible amount of education when I am giving therapy to somebody. My mouth is flapping continually for a very long time, teaching people how to think differently and more appropriately. The third thing about my reality or your reality and what creates a sense of self is what feelings I have, or my emotions. My emotions are directly related to how I am thinking. What I think is how I feel. Most people don't understand that. In codependency, they think other people make them feel, and that is simply not true. And the fourth part of my reality is what I do or don't do, or my behavior. Now, when it comes to negative control, and I'm engaging it in the first way, is I am into negative control whenever I'm telling you what you should look like, how you should think, what you should feel, and what you should do or not do. I'm also in negative control whenever I allow somebody else to tell me what I should look like, what I should think, what I should feel, and what I should do or not do. Now, there are 3 exceptions to that one, because there are 3 times when the issue of letting somebody tell me something about me or me telling somebody else about them is okay. 3 exceptions. One is that whenever you are in a therapeutic relationship and you've paid somebody money to help you, basically what you've done is given them some money to tell you where your reality is all screwed up. And if you're going to get into fighting about that, you're in trouble. You see here in treatment, what you've done is you've paid Mr. Mellody a whole bunch of money in order for him and his staff to tell you where your reality is dysfunctional. Now, it's not that you have to agree, but it is that you have to listen. Because you're paying money for that. You don't necessarily have to take it in and change, but you do need to be listening. The second thing that isn't about negative control is in parenting. Parents are supposed to provide respectful structuring of a child. So in parenting, a parent is not in negative control when they're telling their child how to be, when it's in the child's best interest that they do that, and it isn't to the extent that the child loses a sense of self. The third exception in negative control is when we invite people in our lives to tell us about our reality, such as in sponsorship or just in friendship. If I walk up to somebody and I say, "What do you think I look like?" When they say, "I think you look awful," it's not my place to step in there and fight about it. I just hear that today they think I look awful. I ask them what that is about that, and I think about whether I want to adjust it or not. But getting upset about that is ridiculous and immature. Okay? The negative control then is when I tell you who you should be, or I allow you to tell me who I should be, unless it's under those three other circumstances. Believe me, other than those three other circumstances, who you are, or who my husband is, or who my kids are, none of my business. My adult children. Okay? The second secondary symptom are resentment issues. Resentment is about creating anger endlessly. See, anger needs to be situational. In other words, this is happening to me today, and about that I'm angry, and I take care of it. In other words, I go into my environment and do what I can do in order to get myself comfortable again, get out of the displeasure. Anger is really about feeling displeased because somebody has created an injustice to me. And what I know I can do about that is not to get that other person changed, but to do what I can do with myself and my environment, sans that other person, in order to get myself comfortable again. So if they're say they're disrespectful of my boundaries and are offending me all the time, I don't go into an effort to get them stopped. I'm just not around them that much. See, I take care of it myself. I don't necessarily have to have them change. I might ask them if they'd stop, but if they don't, what they do is none of my business. I just don't have them around me. Okay? Now, resentment is about experiencing some injustice where anger is created. And in any experience of injustice, you have the sense of a loss of esteem. And when that happens, all of us need to get it controlled. I believe resentment is about creating endless anger over a historical experience so that we can restore our sense of esteem and get the person stopped. I want to share with you that won't work. And part of intervening on resentment is getting somebody to stop the obsessional thinking that keeps recreating the anger. The third secondary symptom has to do with spirituality issues. Again, like reality issues, spirituality issues are pivotal because it's in gaining a sense of spirituality that we get relief from being a human being. I define spirituality as the state of being in a relationship with a power greater than self and external to the self that provides guidance, solace, and serenity. Now, how that's created in my experience has to do with my ability to be intimate with others. And I believe intimacy is created by sharing and receiving sharing, by sharing my reality and receiving the reality of others without judgment. And as I'm intimate, as I do that and you do that for me, we get terribly close and we feel supportive of one another. And in that experience in my life, that has gone beyond my experience with you and others to creating a sense of very large connectedness to others and a sense of a power greater than myself. And I've also found out, at least in my experience, that when all that's happening, I am in a state of pain-filled joy or joy-filled pain, which is how I know I am in the absolute essence of a spiritual experience. That's what happens. And it's about connecting to others by sharing who I am as a perfectly imperfect person, and as I'm doing that, somebody else is there to receive it without judgment. And then it happens, and it's wonderful, and it makes the whole difference in somebody's life as to whether they enjoy their life and find it interesting and wonderful or are miserable. The fourth secondary symptom, I say, is about avoiding reality through the use of three phenomena: addictions, physical illness, and mental illness. What that is about has to do with what recovery is about, too. See, recovery is about three things. I always remember this because I always know I'm practicing recovery whenever I'm doing these three things. Recovery is about facing reality, and that's about facing two things: the reality of who I am and the reality of who you are. See, in my disease, I don't do either. I live in delusion about who I am and delusion about who you are. I create fantasies about who you are, and I create fantasies about who I am and what is happening. So recovery in a huge way is about facing reality and, secondly, growing up. And the third thing it's about, which is what makes it so difficult, is that it's an enormous grieving process. It's about facing our losses, and most of that's about facing what we didn't get, and also about losing the fantasy of what we created that we thought we had. Both. So recovery is about facing reality, well, really growing up, facing reality, because you have to grow up to face reality. It's about growing up, grieving, and facing reality. And that's why this fourth secondary symptom, if you don't take care of it before you try to get into codependency treatment, you can't. Recovery, you can't. Because this secondary symptom obliterates reality. I use addictive processes so that I don't have to face reality. See, if I'm a little person in a great big body, I can't face reality because it's too gross and I don't know what to do with it anyway. I'm gross, you're gross, and I don't know what to do. So what I do is I engage addictive processes so that I don't have to do it. And any addiction will do. And I define addiction as any process that for you succeeds in removing intolerable reality, and because of that, it begins to take priority in your life, taking time and attention away from other important priorities, creating harmful consequences that you ignore. And those are what addictions are about. It could be to chemicals, it could be to people, such as a love addict. It could be to sex, a sex addict. Could be to food. You could be an eating addict. It could be to work. It could be to being busy. It could be to washing your hands, being perfect. It could be to religion. It could be to gambling. It could be to many things, but that's what we do so that we don't have to face reality. If we have such a phenomenal need of control that we can't give up control like that, then what we do usually is we surface the reality we don't want to face in the form of physical illness. They call these somatoform disorders in the DSM manual. The third thing we do is we completely remove ourselves from reality by becoming mentally ill, psychotic. If I'm psychotic and I create a fantasy and believe my fantasy, then I don't have to deal with reality today. This fourth secondary symptom needs to be taken care of before you can treat codependency and get people in recovery, because codependency is about facing reality. Okay? And that's why when you come here to get treated, everybody is looking at you to see if you're an addict in some way. Because if they don't get that, at least into minimization, if they don't take that from delusion or denial, at least into minimization, you're almost impossible to treat. It's not that you have to necessarily do anything about some of these things, but you better know, because you're going to be using that addictive or obsessive compulsive process to remove the reality that in codependency recovery we're trying to get you to face. And the last secondary symptom, the fifth one, is difficulty having intimacy in our lives. Now that's the one that usually brings you to treatment or to a therapist's office. Because what we do in our disease is that because we've come out of a family where we weren't appropriately parented, where we weren't taught that we really mattered and that we are wonderful, when we get into adult relationships, we have too great a need for that person to matter to that person, so that when we get in relationships, which we don't know how to do because we've never been taught how to do it, we get into fighting and misery, and then we take all that misery and fighting to a therapist and say, fix it. I want to share with you they can't most of the time because you're too immature to be in a relationship in the first place because you're too codependent.